Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine diving into a time capsule. I mean, not just for the big events, but for the actual personality of the historian writing it all down.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, the strange ways ancient governments worked, the very human struggles of kings, commoners, everyone.
Right.
Today, our deep dive takes us on a fascinating journey through early English history, drawing from this really extensive historical text.
Yeah, it's quite a source.
We're going to pull out some of the most unexpected things from the author's own, like, really candid self-assessment
Mm.
to bizarre laws, dramatic power shifts that shaped a nation. You might think you know this period, but prepare for some surprises.
Absolutely. This source, it's like a rich tapestry, isn't it? It blends his personal thoughts with this detailed chronicle of a really turbulent time.
Yeah.
And what's insightful here is how it shows you not just what happened, but also the why behind it, the motivations, the quirks, the details you often
The
miss.
human element.
Exactly. We'll look at everything from, ancient superstitions right through to the foundations of English law. See how it all connects.
Okay, so speaking of the why, let's start with something really unusual from this text. The historian's own personal reflections, written like his own obituary almost.
It is remarkable, a rare glimpse.
Yeah, into the mind behind the history.
It really is. He describes himself as having a mild disposition,
Uh,
good command of temper, an open, social, and cheerful humor.
Sounds like a pleasant guy.
He emphasizes his great moderation in all my passions. And what's fascinating here is thinking about how that temperament, that dislike of conflict,
Right.
didn't just shape him as a person, but it shaped his work as a scholar, too. Helped him
Hmm.
stay objective, perhaps.
That's a great point. And he gives us this peek into his literary journey, too.
Mm-hmm.
How his early books started slow, but then found an audience.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote his political discourses and the inquiry concerning the principles of morals around 1749.
Right.
And he mentions his bookseller told him the sale of them was gradually increasing. He even found it kind of amusing that answers by reverends and right reverends came out 2 or 3 in a year.
Ah, yeah.
And he realized from Dr. Warburton's railing that his books were beginning to be esteemed in good company, criticism as a badge of honor.
Exactly. And that connects back to how he dealt with criticism, doesn't it? His inflexible resolution, never to reply to anybody. He just stayed clear of all literary squabbles because he wasn't, an angry sort of person.
Which makes you wonder, what kind of historian chooses that path? It's not typical.
No, well, definitely not.
He also talks about his fixed resolution to focus on the positive, to see the favorable than the unfavorable side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And he admits very openly there's some vanity in making this funeral oration of myself, but hopes it's not a misplaced one.
A bit of self-awareness there.
Totally. And this bit's interesting. Despite, as he puts it, wantonly exposing himself to controversy to civil and religious factions,
Mm.
he says he was never really harmed by it, never touched or even attacked by her baleful tooth. Even zealots couldn't make up believable dirt on him.
He sounds quite detached by the end, reflecting on being 65. He knows he only has a few years of infirmities left.
Right.
And he sees his literary reputations breaking out at last with additional luster. But he knows he'll have few years to enjoy it.
Poignant.
Yeah. He says, "It is difficult to be more detached from life than I am at present." A very self-aware moment from, well, a major historical thinker.
So, okay, we've met the man behind the history, in a way. Let's dive into the really deep past he writes about pre-Roman Britain and the surprising power of the Druids.
Right. The source makes it clear their religion was a huge part of their government.
More than just priests, then.
Oh, much more. The Druids, they handled education for the youth. They were immune from wars, from taxes.
Wow.
They had civil and criminal jurisdiction. They even settled disputes between different states, let alone individuals.
So judges and teachers and priests all rolled into one.
Pretty much. And if you disobeyed their rulings, excommunication, which meant no worship, no social contact, no legal protection. Death was seen as a relief.
Harsh.
It was. But the source suggests these terrors of their superstition actually helped keep order among a, quote, rude and turbulent people. It was the bedrock of their society.
Okay, so you have this powerful, organized Druidic system. Then the Saxons arrive, and the source describes their beliefs as completely different, grossest, and most barbarous.
Yeah, a real contrast. Saxon beliefs, well, Woden was their top god, the god of war.
Right.
He promised warriors who died bravely entry to his hall where they could satiate themselves with ale from the skulls of their enemy.
Charming.
Very. They were polytheists, worshipped the sun, the moon, Thor, used images, sacrifices, believed strongly in spells. It was less systematic than the Druids, more based on traditional tales.
Which raises that question the source hints at.
Yeah.
Why did the Druidic system just fade away? Why did it resign its place so easily?
That's the puzzle, isn't it? Maybe the existing culture was ready for a change, or maybe the Druidic system wasn't as enforced as it seemed, or perhaps people were just looking for something new.
Well, the next big change was certainly profound. Christianity coming to the English Saxons, Augustine's mission to Kent.
Yes. Augustine got attention through his austerity, his severe penances, fasting, self-denial.
Leading by example.
Exactly. Plus supposed miracles and, crucially, the declared favor of the court. This led to lots of baptisms, including King Ethelbert himself.
Did Ethelbert force people?
No, the source is clear. He employed no force. Augustine insisted Christ's service had to be entirely voluntary, so persuasion, not coercion.
And it spread from Kent, didn't it?
Yeah.
To Northumbria.
Right, through marriage. Edwin of Northumbria married Ethelberga, who was Ethelbert's daughter. Royal marriages as channels for cultural change.
Right.
And Edwin, described as prudent, he didn't just jump in, he hesitated. He discussed it with his advisors, spent time alone to revolve alone that important question.
Careful consideration.
Very. Only after long thought did he declare for Christianity, and his example was powerful. Then you have the high priest, Coifi, making this dramatic show of destroying the images which he had so long worshipped.
Wow. So a mix of careful thought and big symbolic moments.
Precisely. That seems to be how it took root.
Okay, so with these huge spiritual changes happening, it's maybe not surprising the politics were messy. Let's get into that period after the Romans left, the rise of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms.
As I have Turkey.
Right. The source says, once the Britons were pushed back into Cornwall and Wales, the unity among the Saxon princes just dissolved.
And you get constant wars and revolutions and dissensions, just what you'd expect from a turbulent and military people.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting here is the historian complaining about writing this part of the history.
Complaining.
Yeah, about the uncertainty, at least barrenness of the accounts. He blames the monastic writers.
Ah, right. What does he say about them?
He says they lived remote from public affairs, saw everything through a church lens, and were strongly infected with credulity, with the love of wonder, and with a propensity to imposture.
Ouch. So he thinks they weren't reliable.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He even says the great poet Milton, with all his learning and imagination, sunk under the weight trying to make sense of their accounts.
That's not just complaining, that's a critique of historical sources itself.
Exactly. It makes you think how much of what we don't know is because the people writing things down had their own biases or limitations. Makes history seem barren, as he says.
It really does. And the source gives this grim example of the instability of the Northumbrian kings.
Oh, yeah. It's brutal.
Oswy, Egfrid, Osred, Kenred, Oswulf, Mallo, Aelred, Ethelred, Selwold, another Ethelbert. Almost all of them met violent ends.
Constant turnover, constant violence.
Leading to universal anarchy.
Yeah.
And the source suggests making people ready for rule by someone stronger, like Egbert of Wessex. It paints a picture of utter chaos.
A real mess.
But out of that chaos emerges this incredible figure, Alfred the Great, the prince who saved his country from utter ruin.
A genuine standout. Talented from a young age, sent to Rome, even got the royal unction from the Pope.
But his education started late, right?
Yeah, incredibly late. Totally ignorant of the lowest elements of literature until he was 12. 12. His genius was apparently first roused by the recital of Saxon poems. He learned to read them, then learned Latin, preferred books to ruling initially.
A self-starter.
Definitely suggests a unique kind of intellect, maybe less constrained by formal schooling.
And when he did become king, the challenges hit immediately.
Yeah.
Fighting the Danes.
Right away. Barely buried his brother, and he's fighting Danes near Wilton, who were doing their usual ravages.
Did he win at first?
He had some success, but the source says it was overturned by the superiority of the enemy's numbers.
Things got bad then.
Really bad. The Saxon spirit was quite broke. They felt abandoned by heaven. Some fled, others just gave up. Alfred called for resistance, but nobody listened.
So he had to hide.
Had to seek shelter in the meanest disguises. A total collapse, not just military, but societal.
And that leads to the famous story, doesn't it? The cakes.
Ah, yes. Hiding out in a cowherd's hut, gets distracted, lets the cakes burn, and gets a right telling off from the herdsman's wife, who has no idea who he is.
It's such a human moment, isn't it?
Well,
Makes him relatable. Even kings burn the
it
toast.
really does. But beyond the battles and anecdotes, Alfred's real genius, according to the source, was rebuilding the society. Education was key.
How so?
He knew people were held back by ignorance and bad education. They needed more than just lectures.
Right.
So he used apologues, parables, stories, apothegms, couched in poetry to teach morality. He himself translated Aesop, Orosius, Bede, Bohesus.
Yeah, he translated all that himself while being king.
Yeah, he didn't think it was beneath him. Sovereign, legislator, warrior, politician, and leading scholar, a true visionary. He knew national strength wasn't just military.
He also worked on practical skills, the vulgar and mechanical arts.
Absolutely. It wasn't just high culture. He invited skilled foreigners, encouraged manufacturing, rewarded inventors, promoted trade.
Really building from the ground up.
He even set aside a seventh of his own money to hire workers to rebuild cities, castles, monasteries, a holistic approach to national restoration.
Incredible figure. Okay, let's leap forward now to another massive turning point, the Norman conquest.
Right. And the source sets it up nicely by mentioning Rollo, founder of Normandy, established feudal law, ruled justly, brought law and order.
A contrast to what England was like under Ethelred.
Oh, definitely. Ethelred is painted as ineffective, incapacity, indolence, cowardice, and credulity.
Not a great review.
No. His son-in-law, Edric, was manipulating him, even getting nobles murdered so Ethelred could grab their land.
Nasty business.
And then there is that weird detail about Prince Edmund marrying a widow, Sigfrid's widow, after freeing her from a convent where Ethelred had put her. It shows the internal rot, really.
Which kind of paved the way for invasion.
It certainly weakened the kingdom. Then you get Edward the Confessor, popular king, partly because he reversed some policies that hurt the Danes, which pleased the English, but he was also harsh with his own mother, the Queen Dowager. Shows even popular rulers could be ruthless.
And the source mentions earlier Danish raids as trials for the big one.
Yeah, like practice runs before the main event, and then that vivid image of William's army marching to Hastings.
Singing the Song of Roland.
Exactly, singing the Song of Roland. It's a statement, isn't it? Norman confidence, Norman culture on the march.
So William wins at Hastings. What next?
Secures Harold's treasure, rewards his troops, sends gifts to monasteries back home, and builds Battle Abbey right there on the battlefield.
A permanent reminder.
A lasting memorial of his victory. Very symbolic.
But things weren't smooth sailing after that.
Not at all. He had to come back from Normandy to deal with dangerous discontents. And this is where his attitude shifts.
How so?
He starts seeing his English subjects as basically inveterate and irreclaimable enemies, decides to strip their land, reduce them to abject slavery.
Whoa!
Though he tried to keep up some appearance of justice, he brought back the Danegeld tax.
The tax to pay off Vikings?
That's the one. Edward the Confessor had abolished it. Bringing it back was deeply unpopular, a clear sign of Norman oppression.
And the source calls the conquest incredibly destructive, right?
It does, compares it only to the earlier Saxon conquest itself. Says it's hard to find a revolution more destructive or attended with a more complete subjection of the ancient inhabitants.
That's powerful language.
It really emphasizes the impact. It wasn't just oppression, but contumely, like deliberate insult added on top. The English were reduced to meanness and poverty.
To the point where English became an insult.
Became a term of reproach, yeah. It took generations for any Saxon family to regain significant status.
And that story about Earl Warren.
Right, when asked for his title deeds, he just draws his sword. Says his ancestor helped William conquer the place fair and square. Shows that Norman sense of entitlement, doesn't it?
It really does. It raises that question. How does a conquering culture just erase the identity of the people they conquer?
It's a deliberate process, isn't it? Social, economic, cultural pressure, subjugation.
But, okay, out of all that oppression, the seeds of English liberty start to grow in law, in struggles over power and tax.
Exactly. You see the shift from the Anglo-Saxon military system, the Trinota necessitas, where landholders had to provide soldiers. Even commoners, churls, were armed. That changes under the Normans' feudal system.
And Anglo-Saxon justice was different.
Well, the source points out its challenges. Judges couldn't really weigh complex evidence. They just counted testimonies.
Number, not way.
Right. Which led to things like compurgators, people swearing they believed someone was innocent, even without knowing the facts. Could be hundreds of them.
Sounds chaotic.
And then single combat as a way to settle disputes over false evidence. Seen as an improvement, but still pretty absurd. Rough justice.
Plus the weregild system, paying for crimes with money.
Right, a man price. But the fines weren't fixed. And that crazy detail from Kent, the archbishop's head, was worth more than the king's.
Wild. So the Normans come in, and taxation becomes more arbitrary.
Very much so. You get scutage paying cash instead of doing military service. The Danegeld comes back. Moneyage, a tax per fireplace to stop coin clipping.
Sounds like they taxed everything.
Pretty much, and heavily. So much so that under William Rufus, the source says farmers just gave up farming, leading to famine.
And the forest law?
A huge source of oppression. The king claimed vast forests, made harsh hunting laws, big land grabs, and tight control.
All this pressure cooker stuff. It eventually boils over with King John, right?
Exactly. The source paints him as awful, equally odious and contemptible, both in public and private life.
Doesn't hold back.
No. Offending barons, messing with their families, constant taxes, endless impositions. He even executed a hermit who predicted he'd lose his crown.
Paranoid and greedy.
And then he makes that deal with the Pope, basically surrendering England's independence.
Which made him look weak.
So weak that his subjects felt bold enough to demand their rights, their pretensions. His failures created the opening.
And that opening leads to Magna Carta.
The Great Charter. The source praises it for clarifying feudal law, outlining a legal government, ensuring equal distribution of justice and free enjoyment of property.
Of landmark moment.
Absolutely. And it asserts this perpetual and unalienable right of the people to demand these things. What's interesting is the prudence and moderation of the nobles.
Even though they'd basically won.
Right. They were content with reasonable demands. And the source notes the charter brought back principles from the old Saxon laws of King Edward. It wasn't entirely new, but a recovery of older liberties. Foundational stuff.
But the fight wasn't over with Magna Carta. Under Henry III, the struggles continued.
Yeah, Henry's described as liking prudence and constancy. Too keen on foreigners, ignored Magna Carta. Complaints grew louder.
And the barons pushed back hard.
They did. In 1244, Parliament demanded the right to appoint the top officials, the justiciary and chancellor, a move that would have reduced the king to be an absolute cipher.
Wow. Did Henry agree?
He made small concessions, which just annoyed them more, set the stage for a bigger confrontation.
Which was the Mad Parliament.
The Mad Parliament of 1258, called that by royalists. The barons showed up armed, the king was effectively a prisoner. They grabbed unlimited authority to reform the state.
A parliamentary coup.
Pretty much. And the 24 barons, led by Simon de Montfort, made some big changes.
Like what?
4 knights from each county to investigate grievances, a step closer to our modern parliament. Regular parliament sessions 3 times a year. Sheriffs elected annually by freeholders. Limits on foreign influence. Real checks on royal power emerging.
Foundational steps, definitely. But while all this is happening, Prince Edward is off fighting abroad.
Yeah, Edward's winning glory overseas revived the glory of the English name. But back home, the source says laws were enforced, barons were oppressing people, crime was up, London was getting licentious.
So progress abroad, chaos at home.
Kind of shows that internal stability is fragile, even with strong figures around. You can't neglect the home front.
What a journey we've taken. Seriously, from inside the historian's head, his own self-assessment, to the raw power of the Druids, the shock of conquests, the slow, messy fight for justice, the beginnings of Parliament.
Yeah.
It really drives home that history isn't just names and dates. It's complex, it's human, it's about power, belief, survival, always changing.
Absolutely. And if you look at the big picture, you see this constant tension, right, between central power and local rights, old traditions and new ideas. That push and pull is what shapes societies.
Yeah.
This deep dive into early England shows that things like justice, liberty, even how government works, they weren't just invented. They were hammered out over centuries of conflict, negotiation, often violent conflict. Progress wasn't neat.
Definitely not neat. So for you listening, what's the takeaway? Maybe next time you read about some ancient king or law, think beyond the surface. Think about the motivations, the biases of whoever wrote it down, the long winding path that got us here. And maybe ask, how much of that old struggle, that balancing act between power and rights, is still playing out today?